Well, good afternoon, everyone. Wanted to get back on and do another video. I know it's been a little while, but a lot of active weather here across the United States here on this Saturday afternoon and going into the evening and overnight. So I want to get on, take a look at kind of a couple of the different target areas, what to expect there, and just kind of an overall weather update here on this Saturday. So what we've got here is our visible satellite imagery across the continental U.S. A couple different things worth noticing that I did want to point out. We have this a little bit of an outflow boundary and kind of a system here from this overnight storm system here across Oklahoma. And it stretches kind of over here across central Arkansas and then just south of the Red River here. All of these storms have been kind of pushing off to the southeast in the overnight, and still some storms around the Tulsa area. We are expecting more storms here across the Panhandle and kind of the foothills of Colorado into Oklahoma and Kansas that will probably pop up here in the next couple hours. Also worth noticing is we've got this spin in the atmosphere here, a little bit of kind of a upper level low here that's spinning across kind of South Dakota. And then we also have some spin here across Illinois and Indiana. So we've got kind of three different areas here. This is a little bit of a low pressure system. We call this an MCV, so mesoscale convective vortex. This is actually left over for some storms multiple days ago, actually 2 days ago, and it creates a little bit of this spin in the atmosphere. This is more of an upper level low here that I'll show in a second, and then some leftover kind of storms and an outflow boundary here from last night. So these are the three areas that are going to be primed for more significant thunderstorms and even some severe weather here later today. So do want to take a look at that, but again, I think it's interesting just to kind of see the visible satellite. And for those of us here in North Texas, we actually have a little bit of a storm that's popped up here just south of the Red River, a little bit west of I-35, here along this boundary as it kind of sags off to the south. So possibly might even get something here in North Texas, even though that wasn't really expected, but we'll have to watch that here over the next hour or two. So now moving ahead, did want to look at the Storm Prediction Center outlook for today. So we do have pretty significant area of expected severe weather. So we have this 3 out of 5 enhanced risk here in orange from really the foothills of southeast Colorado, southern Kansas, and then the panhandles of Texas and Oklahoma, including northern Oklahoma later this evening. Then the slight risk 2 out of 5, it does extend up here across eastern Nebraska, kind of the Sioux Falls area, and then western Iowa. And then another separate little bit of a slight risk here across kind of southwestern Indiana and kind of southeastern Illinois. So a couple different areas of severe weather that's expected here. Again, for us here in North Texas, really not even in the general thunderstorm risk. So we'll see if that outflow boundary does kind of present a little bit of a surprise. Looking at the tornado threat, not significant, but certainly we do have two different areas of this kind of brown color. That's a 5% tornado risk. So here across that eastern Nebraska, Sioux Falls, western Iowa target, and then that Indiana, Illinois target. And a little bit of a 2% risk here across southeastern Colorado as those storms form off the higher terrain and move east into a little bit of a pretty decent moist environment there. Main threats today are going to be across this Colorado into Kansas and the Panhandles area. Pretty significant hail is possible, baseballs, possibly even softballs with the stronger storms. These storms are going to move off to the southeast into that lower terrain. And then certainly a damaging wind threat as well. This is probably going to be a little bit later in the life cycle of these storms and then into the overnight as these storms move kind of off to the southeast across southern Kansas and then much of northern Oklahoma as well. So those are our main threats. And again, a couple different areas here across kind of that eastern Nebraska target, Indiana and Illinois, and then certainly here from Colorado into Oklahoma, Kansas, the Texas Panhandle as well for significant severe weather. Certainly maybe not a massive tornado outbreak by any means, but certainly can't rule out seeing a couple different tornadoes across those targets. So did want to look at kind of why this is happening. This is our upper air map here, our 500 millibar map. So what we can see here is we do have a little bit of this kink in the jet stream here. That gives us our little bit of a low pressure system here across South Dakota and even a little bit of North Dakota as well. This is going to give us the chance of those storms here across Nebraska, Sioux Falls, and Iowa. Then we've got a little bit of our kind of MCV here. We can't see it super well this high up in the atmosphere, but I'll zoom down a little bit sooner. And then we do have this kind of enhanced flow out of the west here, kind of coming over the foothills of the Colorado Rockies and then moving across Kansas and Oklahoma. And that's going to give us that enough energy to fire off those storms from Colorado down into the lower terrain here later on. So that's kind of what we can see. Again, jet stream level, 500 millibars up above the surface. Now, when we do look and we go down to our 850, this is a little bit closer down to the surface. A little bit hard to see given everything that's on here. It might actually be easier to see, yeah, if we look here at the surface. So what we can see here, these black lines, these are our kind of pressure kind of gradients here. And so we can see, again, that low pressure system here. Now, what's worth noticing is these kind of orangey, yellow, brown colors. These are our wind barbs at the surface. So kind of showing what direction our wind's moving. So here we can see back here, winds are kind of out of the north. Here across Nebraska, winds are out of the west moving east. Here across eastern Nebraska, they're coming out of the due south. Here from Minnesota into South Dakota, coming out of the southeast. So you can see this kind of counterclockwise spin that we have going. And that's going to give us this target area kind of around the southeast side of the surface low, that forcing, bringing in some moisture, creating that lift to get those thunderstorms firing here across this target. So that's kind of what we can see. It's a little bit easier here with this map. Now we can see our little bit of our MCV here across Illinois and Indiana. So again, what we can see is winds kind of out of the east to the north, here coming out of the north on the west side, coming out of the west here to the south, and then coming out of kind of the south-southeast on this kind of eastern side of that spin. And so what we're going to have here is that this is going to slowly kind of move off to the east. And so that is going to give us enough forcing, likely in this area, kind of right around here on the southeast side of that low pressure, to get enough of that lift to create some thunderstorms. And so we could see some supercells that do form. There would be a tornado threat, especially in this area to the southeast side of that spin in the atmosphere. And so that's why we do have that 5% tornado risk here for kind of the southern part of Indiana and kind of extreme eastern Illinois here later this afternoon. And then lastly, we do have our target area here kind of across the kind of, I guess, the rolling off of the Rockies going into Kansas, Oklahoma, and the Texas Panhandle. Again, we can see generally kind of this wind pulling up from the southeast and then kind of reaching the Rocky Mountains here. And so that's going to create that lift as the winds kind of come up and over the Rockies. Storms are going to fire here, and then they'll generally move off to the south-southeast here overnight. Again, not probably as much of a tornado threat over here, more likely large hail and damaging winds. But certainly still significant severe weather. So again, we've kind of got these different target areas here. Lastly, what I'll do is just take a look at one of our models here, show kind of what is expected here moving forward. If we go to the HRRR here, let me go to the Southern Plains. So this will show kind of moving forward here what to expect. Let me back up just a little bit. Let's go to 17. So if we move forward in time here across the Southern Plains target, we're going to have a couple storms possibly in the Panhandle, and then most likely the southeast Colorado storms, and then also maybe right here around the Oklahoma Panhandle that kind of push off and move into those evening and overnight hours, generally off to the southeast. And again, probably a hail and damaging wind threat there. When we do look at let's see. I'm trying to go remember. Oh yeah, let me see. Let me change sector. When we go look at kind of the Midwest here, Central Great Plains, again, we're going to see those storms kind of form here across eastern Nebraska, southeast South Dakota, and western Iowa. Again, any storms that are isolated here could pose a hail and certainly even a tornado threat. Maybe kind of clustered, not super organized here. But again, any of these storms that are stronger and a little bit more isolated would have a tornado threat. So definitely worth watching there. And then lastly, when we kind of look at our Midwest here, again, we are going to see our MCV that's ongoing now. We've got kind of this storms up around Chicago and kind of the north half of Illinois. So we move forward in time here a little bit. We go into these evening hours. there are going to be a chance that we get a couple of these isolated storms again to the southeast side here of that kind of MCV surface low. And so any of these storms would have the chance to start rotating and possibly produce an isolated tornado threat as well. So again, certainly lots to consider, lots going on here. Last little thing that I was going to touch on here is if we look at our satellite, and then let's go to looking at kind of the overall, just the ocean and the Atlantic here. What we've got is that not really a whole lot going on in the Atlantic basin right now when it comes to a hurricane threat. Certainly, we're just getting into the kind of the peak months of August and September for hurricane activity. We do have a couple waves here coming off of the coast of Africa, but again, really nothing organized right now. Pretty quiet across the Atlantic basin. We do have a tropical system here just off the coast of Mexico in the Pacific. Again, likely not going to be an impact to weather here in the U.S., but again, pretty quiet across the Atlantic. Nothing of note just yet, but certainly still pretty early. The actual peak of hurricane season is really not even begun yet, and typically we see about 90% of tropical activity past this point of August. So very, very early in the season there. Definitely bears watching for potential impacts to the U.S. here coming up over the next couple months, but pretty quiet right now. So could be some storms across the U.S., couple different areas as we outlined. Hope everybody has a good Saturday, and I'll see you back here for the next video.